Afternoon from London. I know we have people joining us from all around the world today, so good morning or good evening to you, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to this webinar on the digital pandemic, cybersecurity in the era of COVID-19. I'm Siobhan Bonita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world. And I'd also like to say thank you to our knowledge partner this afternoon, which is Nominet Cyber. Now, in terms of the topic for today's webinar, COVID-19 has presented huge challenges to governments around the world. They've had to keep their citizens safe, their economies working, and public services running. And one particular challenge for them during this period has been an explosion of cybercrime, with global analysis indicating up to 15 times more scams in 2020 than in 2019, more data records being compromised in 2020 than during the previous 15 years put together, and a significant target shift from individuals and small businesses to major corporations, governments, and critical infrastructure. Cyber threats are nothing new. Long before the pandemic, governments around the world were updating their systems to try and strengthen their cyber defences. But these last 2 years, especially with civil servants working from home and governments having to change their working practices at great speed, have really seen a tsunami of cyber attacks, scams, ransomware, fraudulent applications, and many, many other types of attack. In this webinar, we have a stellar expert panel with us who will discuss the changing nature of the threat and consider how civil servants around the world can best protect themselves, their organisations, and their citizens. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce our expert panel, and we'll hear from each of them in turn. But this is also an opportunity to hear from you, the audience. So whichever device you're listening on today, you should have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please use that function at any time from now on throughout the webinar to send in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of the event. And now to our wonderful panel. First, we'll hear from Eleanor Fairford, who is Deputy Director for Incident Management at the National Cyber Security Centre here in the UK. As a civil servant for the past 19 years, Eleanor has undertaken a range of policy and security roles, both at home and abroad, in immigration and security policy. She previously led cyber threat assessment in the NCSC and now heads up the incident management function with a focus on nationally significant incidents that hit the UK. Then we will hear from Eric Belzile, who is Director General for Incident Management and Threat Mitigation at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Eric's team is responsible for the entire incident management lifecycle, from monitoring and detection through to response, as well as the production of reports on the evolution of cyber threats and assessment of threat levels. Eric started his career in the public service at Statistics Canada in 1989. He's occupied various positions with increasing levels of responsibility covering system development, IT, and data issues, as well as now cyber. Then we'll hear from David Carroll, who is Managing Director for our knowledge partner today, Nominet Cyber. As a security practitioner with over 25 years experience, David has experience in both military and commercial roles. He began his career in the British Army, and at Nominet Cyber, David and his colleagues deliver services on behalf of the cyber security centres in both the UK and Australia, helping to protect millions of public sector workers and improve national cyber resilience. Then we will hear from Martin Miller, who is Lead Cybersecurity Advisor at the European Union's Cyber Resilience for Development project. Martin's main role is to support developing countries from Asia to Latin America on their national cybersecurity strategies and response capabilities, and to foster international collaboration and information sharing. Previously, Martin served as a principal risk manager at the cybersecurity branch of the Estonian Information System Authority, and he also held positions at one of Estonia's largest banks, where he was, including other things, head of IT risk management. And then last but by no means least, we head over to the United States to hear from Thomas Miller, who is Chief of Communications at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the United States Department of Homeland Security. Thomas has served in the agency for 10 years, working to strengthen its information sharing capabilities, increasing the level of public, private, and international partner engagement, and supporting initiatives to improve information exchange. Prior to his cybersecurity career, he served as a linguist with the 22nd Intelligence Squadron of the United States Air Force. So as I say, I'm sure you'll agree that we have a really brilliant panel with us here today. Please do use this opportunity to ask them all the questions that you have, whatever question that might be, using that Q&A function. But now, without further ado, I'm going to invite Eleanor to give us her opening remarks. Over to you, Eleanor.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Siobhan, for that introduction. It's really great to be with you this afternoon. I'm Eleanor Fairford, as Siobhan said, from the NCSE in the UK. So I thought I'd use my opening remarks to really focus on the top cyber threat trends that we're looking at the moment in NCSE, one of which is, of course, COVID and the cyber threats posed in the context of the pandemic. But in addition to that, I thought I would just touch on the cyber threat in the current geopolitical context, which is something that is exercising us greatly in NCSE UK at the moment, and also briefly on ransomware, which is the other massive topic of the moment, as I know you'll all be aware. So I will seek to offer a few brief remarks on each of those topics, sort of setting out the NCSE's take on those sort of high-level threats that we are currently looking at. So in terms of the current geopolitical context, obviously with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the cyber defence authorities across the UK, and I know globally, are on high alert. I know that my counterparts on the panel and elsewhere are all working hard to look carefully at what might happen and to shore up defences against what is happening, and then anticipate any future activity that we may see. The points that I would just pause on are around how this now cyber is very much a established precursor to kinetic and military activity now, just as we have seen in the current context. We saw it back when Russia invaded Georgia. We saw cyber hacks and attacks used just prior to the military incursion against the Georgian government and Georgian services. And then, of course, just before the annexation of Crimea in 2014, similar activity was undertaken, part of an effort to sow chaos, to destabilize, to create uncertainty, to make any military action more easy to conduct and to pave the way. And then, of course, we saw it this year, didn't we, in January, with Ukrainian websites taken down, subject to DDoS attacks, and then messaging to the Ukrainian public. So it's a tried and tested method, and it's one that we're all well aware of. And then the other interesting angles that have come out in this particular campaign, of course, are the kind of democratization of cyber techniques and the broader global IT army getting involved, and hackers, anonymous, waging their own sort of individual war effort, which is, I think, fascinating to watch that unfold. And we'll see how that progresses. And then it's just
we'll just give Eleanor a couple of seconds to see if she can come back in. No, while we're waiting for Eleanor, I think if that's okay, what we'll do is, Eric, we'll come over to you and then we'll bring Eleanor back in, just as she was talking about the democratization of the kind of hackers and everything involved. But over to you, Eric, and then hopefully we'll get Eleanor back in a few moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Good morning from Canada. Just to say it myself, I'm part of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, as previously mentioned. It is part of Communication Security Establishment in Canada, so in short called CSE. So first, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. CSE, reporting to the Minister of National Defence, is one of Canada's key security and intelligence agencies, and also the country lead technical authority for cybersecurity. So this is just to help situate my organization from a government perspective. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is one branch of CSE. So on our national role, we defend the government of Canada. We share best practices with Canadians to prevent compromise, manage, and coordinate incident happening in government and also in critical infrastructure, and work to secure the digital Canada. We also the national cert. So for the topic today, I'll be talking about some of the changes we saw in the environment and what the Cyber Center did to mitigate those threats. And also we'll probably give you some ideas on how you can also mitigate those tricks and actions you can take to mitigate those threats. So a pandemic had a profound impact on our country and around the world, as you know. Amplified by the pandemic, our lives were becoming increasingly reliant on digital communication. Cyber criminals are aware of the digital reliance and are seeking to take advantage of the current situation. COVID-19 has presented cyber criminals with an effective lure to encourage victims to visit fake websites, open email attachment, and click text message links. You have all seen scammers offering this to sell vaccine treatments, testing kits, personal protective equipment, or cleaning supplies to make money or steal your financial information. These websites, emailing links frequently impersonate health organizations and can pretend to be from the government and health authorities. Today, cyber criminals adapt their tactic extremely quickly. We often see something in the news at night, and next day we see related phishing email campaign and new domain and malicious website being created. They are very quick at doing this. Mitigating this fraud almost in real time is a real challenge for government organizations. CSC and its Cyber Center are working in coordination with industry partners so that malicious cyber actors and fraudulent sites are less able to take advantage of Canadians. Since March 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, the Cyber Center work has contributed to removal of over 10,000 websites impersonating the government of Canada. These domains were not only related to COVID-19 pandemic, but it does just show the magnitude of this problem. Also, the Cyber Center partnered with the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, CIRA, to create and launch the CIRA Canadian Shield. It's a free, secure service which provides online privacy and security to Canadians. In almost real time, we share with CIRA our indicator of known malicious website and domain names that we collect from multiple sources. Once registered to this service, when Canadians are attempting to connect to a website, the domain name service validates the name against the list of potential malicious sites and warn the user if necessary. This service is free for all Canadians. Let's talk about critical infrastructure, more specifically vaccine health research. To help address the COVID-19 pandemic, health research organizations are investing millions of dollars in research and development related to combating current and future outbreak of COVID-19. These investments are of extreme interest for malicious cyber actors. We assess that some nation-state actors have set a priority on COVID-19 related intelligence collection and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. It is almost certain that cyber threat actors will continue in their attempt to steal intellectual property under development to combat COVID-19 in order to support their own domestic public health response or profit for its illegal reproduction, their own firms. To reduce these risks, the Cyber Center has continued to raise public awareness of cyber threats to Canadian health organizations by proactively issuing cyber threat alerts and providing tailored service to regional health authorities, biopharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers, and academic research institutions. We also need to mention how the pandemic impacted the work environment for employees in public service and business organization. I think this will interest most of the people on the panel today. Because of the COVID situation, the working environment also changed significantly and very rapidly. Unfortunately, these changes created new cyber risks that need to be managed. Actors have quickly adjusted their tactics, are continually trying to leverage these new vectors of attack. Today, the corporate IT of organization is more decentralized than ever and create additional weak points on the infrastructure. Home or public internet access introduce security risks that cannot be easily managed by organizations. To mitigate these risks, new IT policies need to be created, good user training, and from a technology side, some organizations are looking at zero trust technology as one example. With the rapid increase of number of teleworkers, organizations have quickly deployed additional VPN access points. In some cases, the rapid deployment may have caused the organization to overlook some security controls. As you would expect, we have seen increase in VPN-related cyber incidents over the last 2 years. The use of multi-factor authentication should now be the norm, and organizations should revisit their implementation with multi-layered security in mind. Also, with the high demand of portable computer, that could not always be met. Organizations have authorized the use of personal device to connect to the corporate network. These personal devices usually don't leverage corporate security infrastructure and become very attractive target. Similarly, organizations have quickly moved some of their IT system to the cloud to facilitate access from remote locations. Legacy application migrated to the cloud, not built with cybersecurity in mind, expose vulnerabilities that can be leveraged by malicious actors. With the cloud adoption, we have seen an increase in cloud-related incidents like password spray attack. Again, rapid implementation may have caused you to overlook some of important security coordination. To mitigate these threats, the Cyber Center has produced a lot of advice and guidance on phishing, ransomware, cloud configuration, and overall cyber hygiene. We also have published the baseline cybersecurity control for small and medium organizations that lists a set of low-cost, low-burden security control that you can implement to reduce exposure to cyber threats and get the most value from your investments. So in closing, this is a fast-changing environment and requires significant investment from government to continue reducing these involvement threats. So I will stop here and I'll be happy to take questions later on.
Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks for jumping in as well. Eleanor, I'll bring you back in. But just to say, Eric, I think that really sets nicely because you've covered a lot of things there that I think would be really resonate with the audience. Just how fast I think the criminal elements adapted to the pandemic, how they weaponized the pandemic and changed the nature of their threats. The huge scale, I mean, just you said there are 10,000 websites alone pretending to be Canadian government websites, so the scale of it is enormous. I think something that maybe some of our other speakers will pick up as well, that there are available for people, free resources. A lot of people won't know they're there, so maybe just getting some of those basic things right should be easier than it is. And then definitely something I think the audience will be interested in is how the pandemic shifted new weaknesses, new vulnerabilities, so many more people working from home. And as we go to a hybrid future, I think that's going to be something that people really have to consider going forward. So thank you so much, Eric. Eleanor, we lost you just as you were talking. Yeah. Hacking in to systems, so I'm going to bring you back in if that's okay, and hopefully the connection will stay safe.
Thank you, Siobhan. I will keep my comments brief, and apologies for dropping out. Obviously, like the NCSE's connection isn't great, which doesn't bode very well, does it? But I'll keep it super brief. I was going to just touch on ransomware. My main point on ransomware is simply to point out how in the past 12 months or so, this is an issue that has rapidly risen up the political agenda and even now approximates towards becoming really a national security issue. So we're seeing, cyber criminal attacks launched for financial gain, managing to switch off the Colonial Pipeline oil supplies in the US, managing to take out food producers, managing to really cripple national infrastructure, which from the sort of government point of view is obviously hugely concerning. And we saw it particularly in the context of hospitals being targeted during COVID, etc. So for us, ransomware has become one of the top political items, not least, of course, in the coverage at the most senior political levels in the US, with Biden raising it with Putin, etc. over the past year. So this for us is a massive topic. And then on COVID, I won't repeat a lot of Eric's excellent points. I mean, I would have absolutely endorsed, the increased threat surface as we all went to work from home, the new vulnerabilities that arose, as you said, Siobhan, the technology that could be exploited and that was sort of less secure in the remote working environment, and was the sort of the race to work remotely overtook the requirement to do so securely in many cases, and we are only now managing to sort of catch up and re-secure a lot of those systems that were put into place at that time. Similarly, it was a total honeypot for cyber criminals, as Eric has already described, the online scams, phishing campaigns, preying on people's alarm and anxiety. People are more likely to click on that fake link to that test and trace app if they think they might have come into contact with somebody who had COVID, for instance. So really preying on the environment and the fears of the time and massively exploiting those. And then Eric mentioned also the state requirements, so hostile states adapting their intelligence requirements in order to sort of partake in the kind of arms race of vaccine development and looking for information that would give them the advantage in that kind of a sphere, and that was absolutely the case. And then the last sort of item I would just pick up on is how it's created a new set of data that is attractive to criminals and those who would seek to achieve it. So hack and leak attacks are being seen against COVID registration databases of those who've taken the vaccine, so being leaked by anti-vaccine campaigners to sort of demonstrate, towards their cause, and then similarly, in a way to launch fraud against individuals by hacking into these systems that are available now with all this data on it. So this data has a real value to the cybercrime community, and can be exploited further with secondary fraud, with phishing campaigns and identity-based fraud, and then for things like fake COVID passports, etc. So there's a whole new set of attractive criminal sort of targets out there now as a result of the pandemic, which are being exploited, to the maximum degree, as we have observed. So I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to the questions. Thanks, Siobhan.
Thanks so much. I mean, some really big issues you raised there. Obviously, you brought in the situation in Ukraine and kind of how we've seen cyber playing out in that scenario. But also interesting, you added in, which people might be interested in, as we said, the kind of hackers anonymous groups, the people who are kind of fighting back from their own keyboards, and it's interesting to see how that plays out. Similar to what Eric was saying, everybody had to move because of the emergency very quickly to get these new systems set up, new ways of working set up. But actually there's an urgency now to make sure we retrospectively make sure those systems are secure. And then something that has come up in lots of our webinars, I think, the issue of data security, because also this is such an issue, I think, for citizens when they're engaging with the government and with the private sector in terms of trust. How can they trust people with their data? So that can also be a barrier to getting some of the digital transformation maybe that governments want to do delivered. So thank you very much, Eleanor, for that. And now, David, I'm going to invite you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Siobhan, and hello, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you for 5 or 6 minutes this afternoon. I'm currently sat in Oxford in the UK, and I thought I'd offer just a few thoughts and anecdotes on this topic of cybersecurity in the era of COVID-19. I suppose the general thrust of what I'm about to say is that the cybersecurity market hasn't really been functioning as it should, and governments have responded to take up the slack. They've done so by taking more risk and being more interventionist. And really they've broadened their interventions under whole of society approaches that increasingly include active cyber defense programs. So they're no longer limiting themselves to policy and guidance, but they're actually willing to get stuck in and get involved in the fight, if it is indeed a fight that we're in. So governments and the private sector are finally starting to learn to cooperate in a meaningful way, but it feels a little bit like increased regulation presently, but I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, and there's a long way to go. And the war in Ukraine may indeed help in this regard. So what exactly do I mean by all of that? Well, I said first that the market hasn't really been functioning. I think 3 years ago we were talking about mainstreaming cyber risk in fora exactly like this. We were talking about, when are we going to make cyber like health and safety or environmental protection? Fast forward to the pandemic, and there were certain articles. There was one written by a former chief exec of the NCSC, Kieran Martin, who started using phrases about the market like, it's a market for lemons. And investors and venture capitalists were expressing their disappointment in the performance of the market. 12 months later, we had Lloyd's of London, November 21, I think it was, beginning to halve the coverage they were prepared to offer to existing customers, and actually carving out losses related to cyber war being a very grey term, and instructing its syndicates to issue no new cyber risk for the coming financial year, due, as we've heard, to the rise of ransomware and the evolution of supply chain attacks. And I think as we were going into the pandemic, the penny was really dropping in people's minds that ransomware looked as though it could get out of control. And I suppose it's the insurance data point that of those losses becoming uninsurable that kind of almost tipped me into the camp that said, okay, the market doesn't appear to be taking care of the problem, not in the way that we would normally expect it to do so, as predicted by various industry luminaries prior to that point. Now, this really isn't a criticism of vendors and service providers. You know, their products and services are very necessary and make a significant contribution, and goodness knows where we would be without them. But the point is that attackers, as we went into the pandemic, appeared to be getting better at attacking, driven by the profit motive, quicker than defenders were getting better at defending. And therefore, I think there's plenty of room, if not a compelling case, for more intervention from governments. So what are governments doing in response? Well, it does feel as though they're getting more comfortable with more intervention. So there are many intergovernmental initiatives underway, and many nations are now establishing active cyber defense programs. So these are typically suites of free tools and services designed to help those most in need, those least able to defend themselves. I suppose the one that I know best is the UK ACD program, which now offers more than 20 free protective services or tools designed to detect and disrupt threats. Now, these were slightly controversial in 2016 because, as I mentioned before, they weren't limited to policy. They were protective in nature, and in essence, they were taking up the slack left by the market. And I mentioned increased risk-taking and can offer an example of this that relates to one of the ACD services within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, one of the ACD services that I know best, due to the fact that Nominet delivers it in partnership with NCSC, is the Protective Domain Name Service, or PDNS as we call it. So this is essentially nice to see a thumbs up there. So PDNS essentially prevents users from accessing domains or IPs that are known to be malicious, and stops malware already on a network from calling home. So it's a huge blanket. In some respects, it's quite a blunt tool, but it's a very effective blunt tool. And it kind of plays to the ACD and the NCSC's moniker of it's good at protecting most of the people from most of the threats most of the time. Not necessarily great with the really sneaky APT style stuff, but for protecting the masses, it's a pretty good start. So PDNS currently in the UK protects about 1,000 or so public sector organizations. Now, it was quite a mature service going into the pandemic, but we had to quickly rush to protect the endpoint. So we had to make PDNS work for civil servants who were then working at home. And in addition to that, I mentioned increased risk. PDNS was suddenly expanded to include the vaccine supply chain. Now, this meant onboarding the National Health Service. Now, I don't know if any of you are aware of the National Health Service, the NHS. It is the UK's largest employer. It is the single largest employer of medical resource in the world. It's quite the beast. And this took PDNS to around 2,000 organizations almost overnight. Pre-COVID, that level of risk-taking from government, who were prepared to say, okay, we're getting some IOCs from our friends at CISA telling us that US hospitals are being attacked. We're starting to see that in the UK. Shall we move to protect the NHS? And to be able to protect that organization at scale, but then to expand that to include the COVID supply chain, where we started to include private sector organizations for the first time, was truly groundbreaking. And it goes to the heart of this collaboration that we now seek between government and industry, whereby onboarding private sector organizations, liberal democratic nations, we don't like to intervene in markets. We don't like to interfere. We certainly don't like to cannibalize markets. But there was a need, there was clear and present danger, and action had to be taken. So we're seeing many nations start to consider taking these kinds of, I'm going to call them risks, but I also see them as opportunities. And they're establishing their own ACD programs. Some of them are quite mature now, including services like PDNS. And I think this kind of intervention is to be welcomed. And we shouldn't be squeamish about them. They are necessary. They're not cannibalistic to commercial markets. And I think quite the opposite. I think they can actually foster ecosystems around them. I guess my final point is that government and industry appear to be finally working out how to come together and work together. And I think, weirdly, this may be accelerated by the war in Ukraine. 10 years ago, the Obama administration attempted to force companies to collaborate on cyber defense, and their efforts were largely stymied in Congress. All the calls that you usually kind of hear, that anti-competitive, contrary to capitalistic ideals, I believe even the phrase un-American was used. And we hear similar cries everywhere around the world where we try and do these kind of collaborative projects. Fast forward to the pandemic, and I think you have to just, kind of look at the good stuff. We're sharing IOCs now between government and industry. Almost it's an everyday occurrence. I think we should bear in mind that a few years ago, this kind of would have been unthinkable. These IOCs were secret documents. We've seen legislation from the Australian government now giving it new powers to mandate private sector critical national infrastructure to participate in certain ACD programs in that country. Last year, we saw a new whole of society cybersecurity strategy in the UK. And 2 weeks ago, we saw an executive order from the White House mandating that private sector C&I organizations report their breaches and collaborate with the Shields Up initiative. So clearly tensions still remain, and a more cynical man than me might say that this feels more like government mandation than genuine cooperation. But amongst business, I think there is a genuine realization that the cyber landscape is changing beyond all recognition. Why do I say that? I suppose some context. Just a few days ago, BlackRock's Larry Fink and Oaktree's Howard Marks predicted that globalization was coming to an end. Now, this is a trend that's been underway for some time. The great decoupling, as some have called it, will be accelerated by the war in Ukraine. And my final comment that would be that whatever happens as a result of the war in Ukraine, and whether or not that conflict results in an escalating situation in cyberspace, the prospect of a deglobalizing world of competing internets is sadly coming ever closer. And the implications for cybersecurity are quite profound. They will drive government and businesses closer together more than ever. And I think we will be forced to collaborate in that environment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. I mean, really big issues there. Again, you've echoed what Eleanor said, definitely about ransomware being such a significant issue there, getting out of control almost before, as you said, governments taking a more active role in this. So the market not functioning effectively on its own. And then, like what you said about the need for government and industry to be working well together on this, and showing how that's happening more than it was before. And again, that really good case study there of how you worked with the NHS during the pandemic, a huge undertaking there. We have some questions coming in. I hope everyone can hear me. I think there might be some issue with some people on the sound quality, but I hope they can. But please do keep your questions coming in. We have 2 more speakers left, and then we will go to questions. So Martin, over to you.
Hello from Estonia as well. So yeah, very interesting points brought out from the previous speakers. I will actually talk about from a totally different point of view, and a little bit of what we do and I do in our EU cyber resilience project. So first of all, just for the background, as mentioned earlier, I'm kind of wearing a little bit of like 2 hats. I work at Estonian Information System Authority, under which we have our cybersecurity branch, which also deals with whole of government and whole of Estonian cyberspace protection. We have our national cert under this branch, the cert.e, and critical information infrastructure protection department, and national cybersecurity standard department, and etc. But I work actually for the EU cyber resilience for development project, which is mainly focused on aiding developing countries to build up their cyber resilience capabilities. So this project was started some years ago, 2017. I think Christmas was the time when this contract between different partners were signed with the EU Commission to start this. And the partners are Estonian Information System Authority, UK FCDO, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office is our partner, and also from Netherlands, their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's being delivered by actually Northern Ireland Cooperation Overseas. It's a very international and interesting project. But what we do, we have actually three main focus areas. So the first area of focus is the strengthened cybersecurity policy, strategy, and coordinational frameworks, which means that we help different developing countries to develop their national cybersecurity strategies if they don't have one, or if they have one, we help them to enhance it or further develop it, or to build up a second strategy, for example. Different policies, legal frameworks, laws and regulations, and etc. So all that part. One of the main focus areas in the recent times has been like two main areas is the cybersecurity strategy, and which usually includes, or where we put quite a lot of effort, is actually there are a lot of countries who don't have national critical infrastructure defined. They actually don't know what it is or what it's supposed to be. So Estonian approach has always been that we look this on a service perspective. So we talk about vital services and essential services. This is also European Union side of view. So we don't just look hardware as such, or the pipelines and cables and etc., but we look from the service perspective. Because the end customer is always looking at the service. Do I get my money out of the ATM? You know, but the citizens, they don't care what's behind it, how many cables there are, or how many servers and IT systems there are. They just care that they can go with their card to the ATM and get the cash out, or pay with the card at the store, and etc. So we help to develop these laws and regulations that help to identify it and then how to protect them. A second main focus area of the project is actually helping to enhance their incident response capabilities, meaning where we mainly work with the national and governmental certs. So we help with many countries, we've helped from the ground up to develop and build a national or governmental cert, so the computer emergency response team. And we provide a lot of, let's say, management and technical trainings for the staff. We have developed a training prospectus, which consists more than 20 different types of trainings. And we help through those trainings to build the capacity and capability of the employees of those teams. And the third part, or third main focus area of our project, is actually international cooperation. So its headline is for fostered networks of cyber expertise and cooperation. So in that area, we actually try to put these teams, let's say, within the country, talking with each other, with the public and private sector, for example, or internationally with different, let's say, first.org is one of the biggest organizations which brings together all those governmental and non-governmental computer emergency response teams to share information with each other, whether it is those IOCs, indicators of compromise, or some, I don't know, ransomware topics where, I don't know, one team for example, in UK has discovered a decryption key for a certain type of malware that they can ask through that network that, you know, we had an issue, can you help us? Do you have a key for this type of malware? So this at least from my agencies, from Estonian national cert perspective, we've helped quite a lot of private companies in Estonia to actually be able to decrypt their data if they've been hit by ransomware. I think the percentage was rather high. I think something in 20+% cases, we've been helping the companies to decrypt their data with the key, which is already published somewhere. So these are the three main areas of the countries. Now, coming to the point of how the pandemic itself affected our work. So just to be in comparison, we used to do, I think, majority or if not all of our trainings on site within the country. So our project is global. We started in regional Africa and Asia. We had Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Botswana, and some other countries initially. Now we're operating also in Asia, in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, in Latin American, Caribbean region, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Costa Rica are our main counterparts. So it's a global effort in that sense. And we used to go on site for delivering those trainings. And 2019, at the end of the year, I counted, I had done 79 flights over the year, which is a pretty big number. And by the end of, or the beginning of 2020, by 6th of March, I was already 5 weeks been traveling. And then COVID hit, and until the end of the year, I had zero traveling. So we thought, how we can approach now, because we have so many counterparts, so many people that need an assistance, and how we can deliver our trainings. And then obviously we moved to online training, and eventually testing out different platforms, we ended up with a Zoom. And what the drawbacks are with these online trainings is that when you have a physical training plan developed for like 3 days or 2 days, you can't deliver the same training online like this. And the biggest issue is what we like to call it within our project is absorption capacity. So being 1 day with a room with a person, you can deliver quite a lot. You can read their let's say physical signs, how they understand it, are they following you or not. But when you're doing it online, you can't do that. You don't see the emotions, you don't get the interaction, and that's a very significant an issue for us, for the trainers in general, I think. But on the other hand, what the positive side is, which is my kind of like a quick final point here, is that after going online with the trainings, we also discovered that we are able to deliver our trainings to much broader audience. So when you look at the countries where we provide these, we usually go to the capital cities. But the country doesn't end there. You have rural areas and etc. Where are also people working and need our advice. So with these online trainings, we can actually reach to further a much wider audience. And also the language is pretty interesting. Just last week, we delivered in collaboration with Organization of American States, a training for, I think, 16 within 16 different Latin American countries. And it was done simultaneously in 3 different languages, in Portuguese, Spanish, French, and also English, so 4 different languages. So here I end, not keeping more time away from the discussions.
Thank you so much, Martin. So really interesting to hear about the 3 things that you help with, helping countries to strengthen their cyber strategies, helping them with training for their staff, and also then the sharing of knowledge and good practice across sectors and across countries. And also what you set out there, the positives, obviously, of digital platforms, as well as some of those downsides, one of which obviously is that they can be vulnerable to cyber attacks as well, but they bring huge positives with them as well, including events like this. So thank you very much, Martin, for that. And then last but by no means least, Thomas, we are coming over to you. And thank you to the audience. We're getting questions coming in now. So over to you, Thomas. We have to take you off mute, Thomas.
I'm still bad at this video game, and I've been playing it for 2 years. So I want to get to the question, so I'll try to keep this short. In March 13th, 2020, we all went home and never came back to the office again. I'm still, if you can tell, this is not a real office. You know, it's blurry, but these are obviously bookshelves. And I'm sitting next to my Lego models and all my other fun stuff that they won't let me keep in the they won't let me keep in the classified facilities. So the very first thing that we were concerned about was teleworking and remote learning. And we got very concerned about, like, what are the threats to kindergarten through 12th grade institutions in the United States that all have to move to remote learning. And by the way, I did say this in the chat to the panelists, but I want to give David credit for pronouncing my agency correctly. It is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, pronounced CISA. And we call ourselves the workforce, we call ourselves the citizens. That's fun to say. And sometimes I refer to the work that we do as Sisyphean. Anyway, but so the very first thing we did was start to roll out alerts and advisories focused on, what are the threats to the teleworking masses and the remote learning, the kids who are now having to go to school on their laptops or their tablets at home. And the schools that have to support that. And then immediately the focus turned to how are we going to secure the vaccine supply chain? Almost immediately, we're like, well, we're going to have to develop a vaccine for this. We're going to have to get it into the arms of 350 million people. How are we going to do this as rapidly as possible to get the nation back on its feet? How are we going to do this in a safe and secure fashion? So our Congress passed the CARES Act. We were authorized to hire temporary civil servants from the private sector to help us. So we got some really amazing experts that probably wouldn't have come to work for CISA otherwise, and launched a task force. And I was very lucky. I was fortunate to be part of that task force for varying definitions of the word fortunate. Probably the most stressful. I've been at CISA and its predecessor organization before it became CISA. I was part of US CERT. I realized I need to update my bio, by the way. You said I've been working there for 10 years. That is a holdover from my last version of my bio from 2017. I gave the 2019 version, still says 10 years. I've been working there 15 years. So 15 years I've been doing this, and this is easily the most stressful situation I'd been in, because it wasn't an incident. It was preparing to mitigate incidents that had yet to happen. And it was also, you're not working with a federal agency that's been impacted, where you can just go in the front door and say, like, hey, we're here to help. You're working with massive blue chip pharmaceutical companies. You're working with every step, what we call the ball bearings organizations. Ball bearings being the tiny thing that makes the entire rest of the machine work. We call them the ball bearings organizations for that reason. And they ranged from companies that made serum for use in hospitals, all the way to companies that made cardboard for packaging doses of the vaccine so it can be shipped across the country in refrigerated trucks. And of course, all the parts of the supply chain involved with keeping the refrigerants cold and in the trucks. So massive logistical concerns came to light about trying to protect the vaccine supply chain. And then you talk about the very tip of the spear, and that's healthcare delivery organizations in the United States. And David mentioned onboarding the entire NHS into protective DNS and how that added 2,000 organizations. There are probably 7,000 healthcare delivery organizations in the United States. And that depends on who you ask and how they define healthcare delivery organization. It's very difficult to get an accurate census because it's not a well-defined term. And we still, and so we were trying to figure out, what are the services that we can provide that are preventative in nature, that will help all these organizations improve their cybersecurity posture, and how do we let them know that there's free stuff from the government that you should actually, take advantage of. And lastly, and this is the one point I really do want to make, and I keep saying that, like, I keep talking about this in the past tense. It's not really past tense for me. It's past tense for some of my colleagues who are on the task force, whose temporary civil service has, shall we say, expired, and they've moved back to the private sector. Now that the task force is no longer the #1 priority of the agency because there's a war on. And now for me, though, I'm still tackling this challenge of trying to reach out to all those healthcare delivery organizations and make them aware of the resources, tools, and services that my agency has to offer. Which, for me at least, because I enjoy public speaking and I like to get on an airplane once in a while, isn't the worst thing, right? Please don't throw me in the briar patch. So that's actually kind of fun versus stressful, but it is a tremendous burden. And here's what we're finding out. Here's what we're learning. Is it comes down to workforce. And our director at CISA, Jen Easterly, has made it clear that people and culture are the highest priorities for her. And the people problem, and I don't mean that the people are the problem. What I mean is the lack of people are the problem. There are not enough qualified, technically savvy people working in these organizations to act on the recommendations that we have to provide. So CISA is not the agency that's going to come into your organization and turn the wrench on your IT to make it more secure. We provide recommendations, ask you to follow them, and we're not a cyber regulator, so we're not going to come back and audit you for it. But we do hope that you listen to what we have to say and improve your cybersecurity posture accordingly. The thing is, some of our federal agencies, the ones that which is our primary constituency, and has been for a really long time, they still have, in some cases, like a 30-day backlog on Microsoft patches, which is completely unsustainable. And it comes down, basically like some part of the process and some part of the personnel resourcing still hasn't been solved. And these are places where you would assume they would have they would be able, because again, like overhead is not supposed to be a challenge for a federal agency. If you say like something's a cost, well, it's all a cost. It's, it's taxes. So it's not like, somebody's like, oh, we got to cut the bottom line because our revenue didn't come out, like last quarter's revenue didn't quite match up to our predictions. This is a case of simply not having the right resources in place, not having the right talent pool, emphasis on talent to take care of what needs to be done. And it's not even like we're asking for super sophisticated cyber rangers. We're asking for people to test and deploy patches in a timely fashion. And it's just, and if it's a challenge for, if it's a challenge for the federal government, I don't even want to think about what it's like for a hospital in North Texas.
Yeah.
Right. So that's sorry, I said I would keep it short. I completely failed at that. We'll go on.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. I think that's a really good point to end the presentations on, because again, you stress the kind of scale of the challenge that we're facing civil servants during the pandemic, especially working on cybersecurity. So that having to work with all those companies across the supply chain, just on the kind of vaccine rollout alone, the huge scale of that. I think, again, you've repeated an issue that's come up that so many, I think, officials and people working in the private sector still aren't aware of the free resources and support that is available for them. And then certainly something that will resonate with a lot of people in the audience, just the need for the right level of investment, the right skills. And Martin mentioned this, the importance of training up people so that they can do some of this just to get some of those basics right. So I think lots of issues there that you have all kind of raised. So we thank you so much to our panelists for some fascinating presentations there. We are going to go straight over to questions. We've got quite a lot coming in. I want to kick off with one very quickly. I'm going to go back to Eric because we haven't heard from you, Eric, for a while. You all stressed how quickly governments had to respond to the pandemic, but also how quickly cyber criminals are adapting to different things that are happening around them. So my question is, given the speed with which this issue shifts and changes and the speed with which criminal actors can change the things that they do you think that governments will ever be able to get ahead of this problem, or are they always going to be playing catch up? Eric, your thoughts on this?
That's a tough question. I think we need more investment in cybersecurity for sure. I think, but it's not only in dollar. I think we need to work more. I think we talked, some of us here on the panel talked about partnership with industry and also working more globally. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there that we have not tapped into to increase the cybersecurity. As Thomas mentioned, there's basic stuff that not get done. And I think just raising the bar to those minimum things about like patching, basic cybersecurity hygiene, passwords, multi-factor authentication, and all those things, they're not necessarily very costly investment, but they can reduce significantly the threat and the risk of cyber incidents. So I think we see in the government and also in critical sectors a lot of those gaps, and unfortunately, like my teams are called to respond to cyber incident, and often it's we see the vector was an old device that was not patched in 5 years or something like that. Those things still exist, and it doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily require a lot of investment to fix those things. I think the other gap too quickly is the preparedness, like having preparedness in terms of response to a cyber incident. We often do victim notification, and organizations are a bit clueless about what's happening, and they are not ready. They don't understand where their crown jewels, the information is. They don't have a response plan. The C-suite is not aware of those risks, and suddenly the organization is in big trouble to try to catch up and respond to those things. They don't know what to do. So I think a fast response, taking action quickly, can reduce the risk and significantly of data being taken in terms like, for example, in a cybercrime malware type of situation, you can, if you're quick enough, you can maybe stop it in the early enough so you don't get a victim of cybercrime. So basic foundational work needs to be put in place and doesn't necessarily require a lot of investment, but we need to focus long term on those things to be able to catch up and try to be ahead of the curve.
Thanks, Eric. Eleanor, you were nodding there to some of the stuff Eric was saying. Do you think we can ever get ahead? Also, do you agree? Are you equally as frustrated with Eric that some of those basics aren't being right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of Eric's points really do chime with me. I spent a lot of time doing sort of strategic intelligence assessment and attempting to forecast the future threat trends in the cyber threat landscape. And that, of course, was always, a real challenge. At the beginning of the sort of COVID lockdown, one could speculate as to what was going to happen, and a lot of that really has played out. I mean, you could really anticipate, couldn't you, the sorts of things that cyber criminals were likely to attempt to try. You knew what the kind of lures were going to be and where the scams would be. And I do, I really agree with David's points around the kind of private sector collaboration in order to address some of those really strategic issues, those sort of national security issues at that stage that we needed to move really quickly to address because we knew they would be targeted. So I think there are times when you can predict to a certain extent. We know what it is that motivates some of these groups. We know the sorts of things they're going to go after, and we know the sorts of things that we need to protect. So I think there is a degree to which we can start to do some forecasting. However, yes, the resourcing is always going to be an issue. You can't protect everything. Those who are motivated to make the money off it, the criminals will always be a bit nimbler and looking to be ahead of the curve because that's where they will make their money, isn't it? So I completely agree with Eric that the the really obvious steps, most of the incidents that we see, just as he says, are exploiting the most basic techniques. So throughout COVID, it was the remote working, VPNs, phishing lures. All of these things were the things we have, gone on about on countless occasions. Our guidance is full of these kinds of measures and these kinds of warnings. So exploitation of basic techniques and the need to put in place some quite basic measures. And just to echo some of Thomas's points about government, even within the UK government, same as what Thomas was saying, we conducted an internal review of their self-assessment of how good their own cybersecurity was, and only 24% of them assessed that it was good enough. So even one with the rosy picture of their own self-assessment, so just as he says, if we can't get the basics right in government, then we can't really be expecting everyone else to. So I absolutely agree with all of those comments, yes.
Thanks, Eleanor. David, from your perspective, working with government kind of organisations, but sitting in the kind of outside government, were you surprised that some of these basic things weren't done? Do you think there's a lot more that could be easily achieved, kind of low-hanging fruit?
I wish it were thus. I think I've always said the barriers to doing the basics are generally, if you're small, it's generally ignorance. You don't know what you have to do the basics. And if you're large, you know what has to be done, but how do you affect business change across an organization that could be tens or hundreds of thousands of people in the case of the NHS? So it's those two kind of principal barriers that really kind of stop people from doing the basics. And it does feel a bit like Groundhog Day. 10 years on, we're still talking about passwords and MFA and patching and architecture and all this basic stuff. And you hear industry luminaries, folks who've founded big cybersecurity companies themselves, who say, if people could just do the basics, you wouldn't need my stuff. You hear those kind of those legends of the loft who presented themselves to Congress, 20, 30 years ago, saying that, warning of the dangers that were coming, saying all this same stuff, that it's that inability to do those real basics. But the frustration, the maddening thing is, those real basic things to do are often very difficult for the reasons that I cite. And I think one of the things that, don't get me wrong, there's not much keeps me awake at night, but I do rack my brains and think, where's the next PDNS coming from? Where's the next big ACD blanket that can be kind of thrown onto the fire? I think that's something that I think I'd like to see us doing more hard thinking about. Yeah,
thanks, David. Thomas and Martin, you feel free in a moment to answer that question as well about what else could be done in terms of those easy kind of wins. But we've got quite a few questions, so I want to move on to some of the next questions as well. There's one, Martin, that was specifically aimed at you from Barry Meredith that's come in, but I welcome other people's thoughts on this as well. And it was about how your team assisted a number of entities to uncrypt systems compromised by ransomware. That this was quite fascinating. Do you think the EU would consider commissioning a larger hacker team to provide this help to more victims? And also this touched on, I think, what you said, Eleanor, about how interesting it is to see some of these other organizations getting involved as well. So Martin, your thoughts on kind of, is it possible to harness some of that? I think Eleanor called it the democratization kind of community.
Yeah, well, coming to the question itself, I think this kind of like EU-wide hacker team or whatever, I don't think that will happen. It won't be like a rapid reaction team or what in some areas of EU are being talked about, like a physical reaction team, But actually, I think the system itself already more or less, I think, works in some countries better, some countries worse. And this similar support actually goes through the national certs, so National Computer Emergency Response Teams. But the question here is that what is the capability of the team, that how much the team can handle, let's say, if they are a national team, so to speak, that they should help any citizen who turns to them. So that's more like a capacity of the team itself. So in Estonia, our team is actually, I don't know how many there are today. We got additional funding quite recently, and the team is growing. But we were, well, let's say, CERT Estonia was more focused on government entities and critical infrastructure. These were the main constituency of CERT, and then came the private citizens and private companies. But internally, we've stated that everybody can turn to us, everybody can ask questions, but we just put priorities in straight. And so far, we have helped everyone, even private citizens, even, I don't know, somebody's grandmother has called to our national CERT and asked that, why my ID card isn't operating or something like that.
Right.
But we've helped them, and it comes down to this CCERT networks who change information with each other. So I know that CERT has, for example, these MOUs signed with UK NCSC, our neighboring countries like Finland, Latvia, and Lithuania, and some others as well. And they have, let's say, more trustworthy and more elevated information exchange, and let's say they have quite a high level of trust with each other, so they can share quite sensitive information as well. And through that network, we've helped also a lot of private companies when they are providing us samples of encrypted data, and through which we identify which version and software was used, and then look through our networks and databases that do we have somebody has already made this key or decryption key available, and then we share it with them. So and sometimes when they don't have backups, which is quite often with the smaller private entities, they don't do backups from the data. So there might be cases where we just say that, okay, basically your data is lost, but put that hardware on the shelf, and maybe within a year or so, the key will turn up and we are able to decrypt it. So this is also something that sometimes we have just advised them to do. If you don't have backup, this is your school money now.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Thomas, so back to you on this. I mean, you raised the issue, I think, of the fact that part of your challenge now is to make people aware of the kind of support that is there for them. So your thoughts on why that's so difficult, why actually people aren't using some of that help that's available to them. And also I want to bring in another question for your thought. Now, I knew this might happen with me not having a background in cyber, that I'm not sure I understand entirely all of the questions that are coming in, but this one, Thomas, I'm going to put to you first, and then Steve West has asked, how concerned are you with IoT devices which may have significant processing capacity but are often overlooked on networks? So Thomas, your thoughts on that question, but also on the issue of why aren't people just taking the help that's available with cyber security?
Everybody should go to, on the topic of ransomware, which we learned from watching hospitals get hit with it. Ransomware has a negative impact on patient outcomes. That is the most polite way that I'm allowed to say it. There's two sites that I want people to be aware of, though, that do have free resources for dealing with that. One is our site, stopransomware.gov. Stop ransomware is all one word, .gov is .gov. And the other one is our EU partners, No More Ransom, which is, I believe, Europol and several other partners, including a lot of people from the private sector, working together to publish decryption keys for a wide variety of ransomware families. And so those two resources I want everybody to be aware of. And everything on those sites is free and available to all. So it's not restricted to, like, our stuff on stopransomware.gov, all the resources we have there is not restricted to just US.
Yeah.
But on the topic of IoT, so before IoT was a word, there was this thing called a printer. and every office had a printer in it, and nobody ever patched the printer because nobody read the manual and figured out how to do it. And red teams love printers, because our red teams love printers. The guys who like do the very serious 90-day penetration tests on organizations. It's a great place to go. like test your persistence, see what you can get into, and once you have a persistence on a printer, even though it might not have the most processing power in an organization, it might not have all the network connectivity you want, but it has some.
Yeah.
And if it has enough memory, you can persist on it. And you can also do fun things like tell people that it's out of white ink. So like that is IoT in a nutshell for me, is to go back, there is prior art on almost everything in cybersecurity now. I use the story of the printer as a way to say, that is the IoT problem.
Right.
Nobody patches the thermostat screen. Right. Nobody's going to patch their refrigerator. What I tell everybody who will listen when they're considering making a significant investment in IoT, and that includes people who are buying smart appliances for their home, find out how does it update? Does it update itself? Do you have to update it? Where do the updates come from? Right? What is the patching process for your device?
Yeah.
If you can't understand that, then find another solution. And if the manufacturer says, it just ships as is, it doesn't have any updates, then again, that's not the right answer either.
Yeah.
Because that will not be the case for forever. You're going to want to hold on to your refrigerator longer than 3 years.
I can see David nodding away there. So essentially, read the manual and educate yourself, I think, is the key message from that. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. We've probably got time for one more question. I'm going to put one question to all of you, the final question that has come in. But just to say to the audience, so those resources that have been mentioned, certainly the ones Thomas mentioned there, but I think other panelists have mentioned resources as well. We'll make sure we share those with everybody who has registered for this event. So we'll give everybody the addresses of those. And also to say there's an email that's just been sent out. It's a short questionnaire. If you're in the audience, please take a couple of minutes to fill in that questionnaire for us. It just means we can give you exactly the type of webinars that are most useful for you. So thank you in advance for doing that for us. But we've got a final question that's come in from the audience. It's from John Wilmot French. I'm going to put this to all of you on the panel. And the question is, we need to manage the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So what is the panel's view on the evolution of Web 3.0 as a means of improving the identification of malicious actors? I hope that makes sense to all of you on the panel. David, I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you, Siobhan. Just before I go there, if I may, just on the IoT question.
Yeah.
In November of last year, there was a piece of legislation introduced in the UK called, he says, scrambling, looking for his hurriedly scribbled notes, the Product Security Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill. Very, just trips off the tongue. The PSTI bill, and essentially that's kind of worth maybe having a look at if you're interested in the legislative world as it relates to IoT. And I know, sorry, Eleanor, I'm not trying to steal your thunder, because you probably put a lot of hard work into this, but I know NCSC was all over this. But that's worthy of a look. Turning to Web 3 and Web 3.0, I'm assuming we mean Web 3 rather than the semantic Web 3.0, but I'm going to go with Web 3. The two often get slightly confused. And the honest answer is, I don't know. I think I wait to see with as much interest as John does, in terms of, is this going to deliver us the the panacea that Alex Stamos, 10 years ago told us it would take 30 years to realize? Or is it the case that this will just introduce new peril? And will this actually create new winners and losers? And will it actually create as much threat and risk to democracy as the old internet that we're trying, whose problems we're trying to solve? So I guess, I think that and I hasten to add, I'm pointing from, I speak from a position of non-expertise on Web3, but I think, Elon Musk famously has kind of derided the concept as just the latest buzzword. Others have been steadily chipping away at this for a long time. But I think, tellingly, if you look at what, should we say, certain nations like Russia have done in terms of their rebuilding of their own internet, they certainly seem to be working very hard to create something that, whilst they might not be calling it Web3, I think we would understand it very much as an equivalent to that. I'll throw it to my colleagues now on the panel to see if they can offer any more light on the topic. But yeah, my vote is I watch with interest, jury's still out.
Thanks, David. Thomas, your thoughts on this find, and I guess we could broaden the question is, do you think, are you optimistic about the future in terms of can we get better, I guess, at securing our systems?
We are coming up on 40 years in the history of this entire practice, right? And the information, well, if you want to be pedantic, you could take it back to cryptography, which has been around for millennia now. But I'm going to stick with computer security incidents, and I think the cuckoo's egg dates back to the 80s. So that's why I say, like, we're going, like, we're basically like, yeah, we're somewhere in 40 some odd years. 40 some odd years into the automobile industry. Car insurance, mandatory car insurance wasn't a thing yet. Safety in automobiles was barely an idea. It was build the biggest, fastest hunk of, like, heavy metal and throw it on the road and blame the driver for whatever happens next. And that is still that is what helps me sleep at night, knowing that, like, certain things move at human speed. There is no Moore's law for organizations, for humans, for culture change, for professionalization, which is a big topic I get on about sometimes. You can have a whole other panel on the profession of cybersecurity. I will come and speak for 90 minutes. And all of those things are going to have to take shape and mature before we really start to settle down in these basics that have been discussed so much on general awareness of where to go for the best information on how to protect yourself, on minimum standards for Internet of Things, and for why investing in non-fungible tokens is a bad idea, to bring it back to Web3. So all of these things that, all these things will have to become sort of what our descendants might call common sense. They aren't for us yet.
Yeah.
We're still in the era when people are building bridges, but there is no civil engineering certification.
Right.
So we're and that's okay. It's going to take time. It's going to take decades of work and effort. And I fully expect to retire and still see us, in the stages of just getting around to putting in these minimum safety standards for all the things we rely on every day.
Thanks, Thomas. We are going to have to, we've just got a couple of seconds left, but Martin, your thoughts on this then? Do you agree with Thomas? We're getting there. We will get there, but in the meantime, is a lot of damage going to be done if the criminals are quicker than we are at getting there, I guess?
Oh, absolutely. I will very briefly, 4 points I want to make. So in terms of trying to get ahead with the criminals, I think one of the main topics is actually education and the educational sector, and all those curriculums in the schools and universities need to change. bring in more computer science and these types of topics. So because the general cybersecurity is lacking professionals globally. I think there are, I don't know, I think like 20,000 plus open positions within EU for cybersecurity professionals. And coming to the IoT point, I want to emphasize that even before patching those IoT devices, please change the default passwords and accounts. So how many of you, when buying a new appliance and plugging it in, have changed your default password for your smart TV and etc.? Not many, I think. So this is a big issue. Now, coming to the Web3, the third thing, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not really familiar with the concept itself. I guess the blockchain technology that is associated with this Web 3.0, in my opinion, all the blockchain technologies lead to, let's say, traceability, that you're able to trace back to the original source of when something certain time happened. So there is a big debate in United Nations, as probably many of you know, between the Russian proposal and let's say the more, let's say, Western approach to the open internet. So Russian approach is whether the internet should be governmentally restricted and closed, so to speak, or controlled, a better word, or it should still be like a free global resource. So this is a very big debate in the UN that is happening, and I'm, let's say, when you look at from the security perspective, every security specialist likes to have a control over things. But when we talk about freedom of speech and expression and etc., the Western values, so to speak, then I'm more pro of this free global resource part. So this is my very short summary of the things.
Thank you. Eric, your thoughts, I guess, on Web3 and just the future, kind of how optimistic you are we can get the basics right.
Yeah, I think a lot of have been said on that. It's more or less a concept right now. I think, yes, there's advocate about improving security, but at the same time, there's people with malicious intent can also leverage that for their own agenda and maybe hide behind these things. So no, I think we need to see how this will evolve in the future. On the IOC questions, this will just increase our threat surface. I think it's like organizations have a hard time to manage number of laptops or desktop that they have in the organization when they're going to have thousands of IoT devices to manage. It's going to become even more complicated. So yeah, opportunities for, unfortunately, opportunities for the cyber malicious actor.
Thanks, Eric. Eleanor, we started with you. I'm going to finish with Web3, IoT, or just anything about the future. You leave us with your final remarks.
Thank you so much. Hopefully my internet will stay on for this duration, just for my closing remarks. But yeah, just a couple of quick thoughts. So the trick on IoT and many of these other internet connected devices is around removing the burden of responsibility for cybersecurity from the individual citizen, from the person who has to sort out the updates, change the passwords. So obviously the new legislation is all about secure by design, make it as easy as possible, and thereby reduce the threat surface. And I think, that's very much the direction the UK is heading in. And I know that's very much what the legislation is designed to achieve. On the resources that have been flagged up, I just thoroughly wanted to endorse those. And I wanted just to link that across to the democratization point. I know the No More Ransom website and initiative is a collection of decryption keys that individuals can post and make available to the kind of global community. And that feels like a really nice example of the kind of collective endeavor that we can put together on this, recognizing that ransomware is one of these like indiscriminate threats that equally attacks all countries. It's not a kind of a factor of bilateral relations between states. It's just cybercrime that hits all of us. And it's a nice example of where we can, you know, the power of the community to harness individual experiences, private, public sector. And I think that's a really good example of that, with these keys being made available, as Martin and others have said. So I would thoroughly endorse that, and I would suggest that is the way forward. So in terms of looking ahead, and we've talked about public and private sector partnership and the need for government in some respects to be more interventionist and more risk-taking, but in other respects to roll out further across, kind of to make use of resources beyond government. So, you know, reaching out into the private sector and reaching out into, dare I say it, the sort of hacker community. So, you know, making the most of the expertise that sits out there, which is necessarily way beyond what government itself can corral. So I think there's some really nice, big, crunchy existential questions for us about how we tap into that and make it a force for good, and sort of and upskill the kind of general thresholds more generally, without seeking to do it all ourselves, because obviously we can't, you know, even within the whole community. And things like when we see things unfolding at the moment in Ukraine, this makes me wonder this same question. It's like, how can this broader activity be mobilized as a sort of general force for good? And I think I'll leave my thoughts at that point. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, really interesting, loads of food for thought there in terms of that as the final remark. So it just leaves me to say, I can't believe we are out of time. It was such a fascinating conversation. When time just flew past. Thank you so much to our brilliant panel, to Eric, to Thomas, to Martin, to David, and to Eleanor, for sharing your expertise with us on this such an important subject. I hope the audience found it very useful. Thank you for all your questions coming in. We will be sending round a link with the video to everybody who registered, so you can watch it all again or share it with your colleagues. And we will also be sending a link in a week or so with an article covering all of the key points that were raised today. So again, you can share that with your networks. So thank you to our panel. Thank you to Nomnet Cyber for being our knowledge partner today. And I hope we see you all again very soon at the next one of our webinars. Thank you to everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.